All right. So it's about 2 after now, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Um, First off, hi everybody and welcome. Um, Laura is asking me if I have another joke to start with, and unfortunately, I do not. But if anyone has one, put it in the Q&A there, and I will do my best to relay it. But otherwise, we can go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining. This is the second week of our What's the Point series, where we take a topic and then dig into it. This week, our What's the Point topic is what's the point of encouraging and tracking giving? Obviously, we're all encouraging giving, we're all tracking giving, but what's the point? Why are we doing that? And so today, joining us, I have a very special guest, Brent Spicer. Brent is the executive vice president of MortarStone. So I'm gonna step aside for a second, and Brent, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Andrew, for having me today. I'm glad to be with you and the churches that are here today. Um, I'm, as Andrew said, I'm with MortarStone, which is a generosity software company. If you haven't heard from about us, and then we also do some training and some services around some real specific things around giving, including non-cash giving, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But my background is financial planning and also in ministry before I joined the MortarStone team. So I'm happy to be with you today.
All right, and quick introduction for myself for anyone that doesn't know me. My name is Andrew Triplett. I am the Director of Consulting here at Touchpoint Software. It is my job to come alongside our church partners and work closely with them to help them set and achieve goals using Touchpoint and other software like MortarStone if necessary to help track those goals. So little housekeeping before we dive in. By now, everyone is pretty familiar with this Zoom thing, but just to reiterate, if you have any questions, go ahead and put it in the Q&A and we will address those. I see questions already coming in. We will do our best to address those at the end. One question that come in, Will is asking if we coordinated our red shirts. We did not. That is just a happy coincidence. Thank you, Will, for noticing. All right, so now I'm going to jump aside and, sorry, actually first, let me go over agenda real quick, set an agenda for us. First thing we're going to do, we're going to talk about how to engage and retain new visitors going into the summer. Then we'll talk about giving, how giving has stabilized, but there's a caveat there, and Brent's going to talk about that. How do we encourage new givers, effectively track givers and move them through the tiers of giving, and then finally, we'll wrap up with what effective segmentation looks like for givers. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Brent, and he is going to dive in.
All right, thank you. So we're beginning with how to engage and retain new visitors going into the summer. And by the way, this can apply to visitors you may have had over Easter, but then also as you're going into summer as well. And depending on your church, some churches have more visitors during the summer than others. Some churches don't have as many. But regardless of where you are, you will have some visitors over the summer. It could be people visiting with family, they could be visiting your area, or they could be moving into your area if you're in an area of the country that's growing population wise. So those are kind of the settings that we're talking about. Andrew, if you'll go to that next slide, let's talk about some ideas of how to engage these givers. So first of all, identify their stage in life and connect at that level. That's one of the things that we recommend that you do. And an example of that would be if a family attends for the first time, have someone like a children's pastor or children's director send a thank you to that visiting family, like a thank you card, and encourage them to attend an upcoming outreach event, or maybe it's a children's event, something like that that would connect to that children's ministry. That would be a great way to engage with them. But something to keep in mind as well, that second item is we want to make sure that we don't overwhelm them with too many opportunities. Research shows that if you give somebody 5 choices, their likelihood of doing nothing is much greater than if you give them 1 or 2. So we recommend just giving them one thing that they can engage with. And this example could be a communication about a welcome event, for example, or back to that earlier example, a children's event, if it's a children's pastor. So just kind of focus in on what's that one thing that would fit that family or that your church does best and use that to reach out to them. And then last but not least, another idea could be use text messaging to send a quick follow-up message, thanking them for coming, and maybe even including a $5 gift card in your text as a special way to say thank you. And then also remember to include a link for prayer if they have prayer requests, or a way that you can help them as a church family. So those are just a few quick ideas of how to engage with those visitors, connect with those visitors, but also we want to talk about how to engage with those new givers as well, or first time givers. So a couple things we recommend that you do that we see that works best is, first of all, look back. And we recommend starting with looking back over a year, but then you can drill down into a quarterly or even every 6 months. But you want to look back and track how many new givers you've acquired, which means how many new givers have started giving for the first time to your church, and how many of those households have you retained as well. And then the second part of that is how much of their giving was retained over the last year. So you want to look at the households and the retention rate of those households, but also the retention rate of that giving. So let's go to the next slide to look at some examples. So here's a view in our analytics, and you can see in this example, first time givers, the chart on the left, you can see how it's a comparison of, and these are households, by the way, how many new givers did we have this year versus the same time period last year over a 12-month period of time. And you can see that those new givers is down in this church example pretty significantly, about 33% down. This is pretty typical of what we're seeing in most of the churches. We have analytics on over 500 churches in our system right now that are active. And so if you kind of think about our environment over the past year, most churches giving has been stable. It's either been slightly up, slightly down, or the same. And a lot of churches they've really been thankful that their giving has been stable. They thought it would have gone down. So that's like a praise God moment there. But if you look under the hood a little bit deeper, the problem we're seeing, the issue in a lot of churches, is their new giver acquisition. The number of new givers starting to give to their church has been down over the past year. And so that's why this is super important, why we're starting with this. But then if you look also at that chart on the right-hand side, you can see the first time givers, but also you can see how many gave a second gift during that time period. And you notice that's also down 15%. And so that's a really important metric as well to track and to watch. So basically that means this church's retention of first time givers giving a second gift is down 15%. So, and then if you look at how many had no gift in the second period, you can see that that's up 29% as well. So both of those are negative trends that we really want to watch. So let's go to that next slide. And so what we see is most churches' retention over about a 12-month period of time of new givers is around 20 to 30%. This church's example, it was actually down around 25% when we looked at it. So that's over a 12-month period of time. So if your retention like this church is under 30%, then what can you do to retain more of those new givers? So some things to think about or questions to ask is, are you sending thank you notes and emails to your first time, second time, and third time givers? Now, one thing that I'll point out, a lot of church management systems and online giving solutions actually don't allow you can't see second time and third time givers. A lot of times all you can see is that first time giver. And so that's where our analytics can come in and help you, is seeing not just the first time givers, but also the second, third time, and even fourth time givers. Because we find that sending thank you notes and emails to them when they give the first time, second time, third time, and even beyond, that's the real key to increasing that retention rate to like 40, 50, 60%. And then second thing is someone on staff reaching out to those people to help build relationships, kind of like what we were talking about with engaging givers or first time visitors. As they give, it's even more important to reach out to them and start building relationships. And then the third thing, do your first time givers know what ministries the church offers? So as someone on staff reaches out to them, they can talk to them about the different ways that you can minister to or help that family to get involved. Again, it could be children's ministry. It could be them inviting them to become a member, maybe starting that process. So there's lots of different ways that you can engage with those givers. They're telling you by their gift that they believe in your ministry. So it's a great opportunity to invite them to get involved. So that last thing there, part D, communications should be targeted relationally by each ministry. So stewardship ideally would cover all ministries, and you can involve your whole team in reaching out to those people depending on how they engage with your church. And that's kind of the power of seeing a system like MortarStone, seeing your giving data at deep levels, and then a system like Touchpoint where you can see the different ways that they've been involved or what parts of your church that they've engaged with. You can involve the right ministry team member for how they've been engaged in your church. So let's go to that next slide. So we also, as Andrew mentioned, we not only want to think about our new givers, but we want to talk about our other givers as well, what we call core givers and top givers. So one of the trends that we've noticed is I mentioned earlier that how total giving has been for most churches has been stable, but new giving and new giver acquisitions has been down pretty significantly. So what we're seeing is the top 10% of givers is really what has stabilized. So let's go to the next slide and I'll show you a report that gives you an example. So we call this our giving band report. And you can see bands 1 through 5. These bands are based on the level of giving, the amount of giving. So if you look in that kind of middle column, the average giving, you can see band 1 is like $77. Band 2 is $495. So we do these based on ranges. Band 1 is $1 to $199, for example. Band 2 would be $200 up to $500, and so on. And so the reason I wanted to show you this is you can clearly see some of the trends that we're seeing in most of our churches. The only giving bands or band that's really up in terms of giving is the top givers. You notice that band 5 range or line, that row is the only one that's positive all the way across. So what we're seeing is the reason that churches giving overall is stable or has been stable over the past year is because the top givers have been giving more, which is in essence made up the gap for those new givers being down and even those lower bands being down as well. So that's a really important trend for you to be aware of as well. And our analytics can show you those levels in those ranges and show you where you're healthy or maybe unhealthy. So let's go to that next slide. So one of the recommendations for increasing retention of current givers is to look back and track how many core givers you retained. And so the way we define core givers is in those giving bands, that giving band report is bands 2 through 4. Band 1 is typically more new givers and lower level givers. Our core givers are your most consistent givers. They're in both frequency and amount are bands 2 through 4. So we recommend that you keep an eye on the retention rate of how many of our core giving households we retain from year over year. And then secondly, kind of like we talked about with new givers, track how much of those core givers giving was retained over the last year as well. And so we want to look at an example of that. Let's go to the next slide. So here's what we call our retention report for core givers. And you can actually see here percentage-wise and by number of households, you can see how many core givers increased their giving. We call it graduated. You can see there 214 households increased their giving. And this is a kind of a large church example, but you can see the number of households here. A little over 4,500 or 70% basically of the core giver households were retained as core givers. In other words, they stayed in bands 2 through 4. Those who graduated actually increased their giving band. They may have gone from 4 to band 5, for example, or band 2 to band 3, etc. But then notice the real call out point to be aware of is the lagging givers, those who dropped to band 1. 520 households went backward in their giving. That's a really important leading indicator to be aware of and to see. But then also notice a pretty big group, 1,268. So almost 20% of the households, and these are core givers, did not give in that recent period, that 12-month period. So that's a key thing to be aware of and to know as well. And we want to engage with those givers, both who increased their giving and those who decreased or stopped giving. Let's go to that next slide and we'll talk about how to do that. So first of all, we want to thank our core givers we recommend, so you notice we talked about thanking new givers regularly. Typically that's weekly or at least monthly with new givers, first time, second time, third time givers, etc. With core givers, you don't have to send them thank you notes or emails quite as frequently. We recommend doing that quarterly. And that's what we see that works in the churches that kind of our best practice churches. And another idea, when you send them a thank you note and or email or phone call, we, especially with emails, we see churches that send out like a quarterly statement of the ministry, like what's some of the things that they've accomplished, what's some of the ministry impact and stories that they've had. And some other churches that we say, they also accompany that with a kind of a financial summary of that quarter as well. And so that's a great thing to do, to keep those core givers engaged with you and knowing what's going on at the church. But secondly, this is another great example to have pastors reach out to them to form a relationship. And going along with that, you could invite them to get involved in a ministry service. Again, this is where Touchpoint can come in. You can see if they're involved or volunteering at the church. And if not, this is a great opportunity for a pastor or campus pastor, et cetera, to invite them to start volunteering or getting involved in an area. Again, maybe they're not a member yet, but they're a core giver based on the level of giving. That's a great opportunity to invite them to become a member of your church as well. And the other thing is, we recommend having pastors contact lapsed and lagging givers. Now, the way you do that's really important. We never recommend mentioning the giving when you call one of these families, but instead call them with an approach, sort of something like this. Hey, we're calling our families just to pray for them and see how our church can serve them. And we just wanted to ask, do you have any prayer requests that our team could pray for you about? And many times that person will open up, or that family will open up about what's going on, because that giving is a sign of some underlying issue. And that could be a health issue, a family issue. It could be a job issue, a marriage issue. It could even be that something happened. They got their feelings hurt at the church, or they got upset about something at the church. Whatever it is, many times that prayer request offer, they'll open up to you of what's going on, and then you'll know how to minister to them, and you will retain their giving. But more importantly, you'll retain them as a member in your church and possibly get them involved again. And then last but not least, it's a great opportunity to do some targeted offerings of classes like financial classes, generosity classes, especially to those lower giving bands like bands 1 or 2. I think so. Back to you, Andrew.
Yeah. So now let's talk about how do we encourage new givers. So kind of picking up where Brent left off. What are some ways to go about this? First, talk about money. This is something that not a lot of churches do particularly well. There's kind of this, there's this concern around talking about money, that it is something that's private, and we don't want to upset or frustrate anyone. But things like Financial Peace University, that's a great way to engage the congregation and start that conversation about money. Cultivating relationships. It's easier for someone to give to someone that they know. So we'll talk a little bit later about walking alongside an individual and sort of what makes them tick, what makes them want to give. Share compelling stories, anecdotal evidence of God's faithfulness in their life through giving. Those resonate very, very well for all those people who are concerned or hesitant about giving, just to see that in someone else's life, that God did, in fact, bless someone through their own giving. Get them plugged into a ministry within the church. Like I said, people like to give to what they know. They like to give to what they're already involved in. So bringing them into the fold, bring them in to be a part of those ministries. Cast a vision. I'm going to talk a little bit later about, a lot of people like to give to what they understand. And if they don't know the vision of the church, if they don't understand what that gift is actually for, they're going to be less likely to give. And I'll show you evidence of that in just a moment. Ask. Going back to the first point about talking about money, so many churches miss this part of just ask. It needs to be something that is discussed. And hey, this is what your dollar is for, and we need it. So please give to the mission of our church. Make giving easy. That's something that Touchpoint we strive to do, and we have tools to make the giving process as easy as possible. And then finally, Brent touched on this quite a bit, communicate appreciation. And that step is probably the one that's the most overlooked. Again, kind of going back to that first part where churches don't sometimes like to talk about money, they skip that last part, because even showing the appreciation is an acknowledgement of talking about money. And so that part is missed. The handwritten notes, especially for those top givers, are extremely important and go a long way. All right, so I have a few studies here that I want you to take a look at. These are from the Barna Group. The first one that I want to show you is this evidence of what people like to give to. And so you can see here on the chart, I'll break this down. Everyone, by the way, is going to receive this slide deck, so you can kind of take your time and really dig in and dissect these. But what I want you to take from this is a group of people who give to global poverty. And of those people that give to global poverty, what else are they giving to? And you can see in the yellow bands that all these people who are already giving to global poverty are more likely to give to other things that are similar in nature. So people who give to global poverty, 77% of them, up in the left-hand corner, have provided food to a needy family. 74% of those givers have donated in-kind items. 53% have donated to help neighbors. And on the reverse side of that are the people who don't give to global poverty. Those people are less likely to give to all the things that you see listed on the screen. Again, 51% of those people only 51% provide food to needy families, and so on. So what we can really take away from this study is that if we have multiple funds, say we have a general fund and we're also launching a building campaign, the people who are already giving to the general fund are the ones that are most apt to give to, say, the building fund or any other initiatives that our church has. So that's a great place to start in terms of when we're soliciting or looking for givers. Next, I find this one to be fascinating. Get people involved. If people are more involved, like I said a moment ago, people who are more involved are more apt to give to what they love, to give to what they're involved in, because they have ownership of it. So this is another study from the Barna Group, and I find it fascinating. They asked both pastors and Christians to respond to the following statement: it is okay for members to volunteer for their church instead of give financially. Only 9% of pastors either somewhat or strongly agree with that statement. 9% of pastors said, yeah, you can volunteer rather than give. There's a disconnect, because when you go to the congregation, all Christians, you can see 47% of those individuals said they either somewhat or strongly agree. So the majority of Christians are saying, yeah, if I can't give, then I'm going to volunteer, and those are equivalent. And so there is a disconnect between the pulpit and the congregation that needs to be taken into account. And you can see that the biggest band there are the pastors who say, no, giving and volunteering are not the same thing. We strongly disagree that volunteering and giving, because we need those dollars to fund the mission of our church. And what this says to me is that pastors aren't doing a good job of relaying, of casting that vision to their churches to say, hey, this is what the dollars are for. And to take that last one here, to take that concept one step further, again, lastly, from the Barna Group, they did a study of what people consider to be one of the most generous things you could do, and to rank those things in terms of what are the most generous things you can do. They're at the top, taking care of someone who's sick. The majority of Christians said that is one of the most generous things you can do, is taking care of someone who is sick. After that, volunteering for an organization. So again, going back to that concept of volunteering and being involved, people who are involved are more apt to give to what they're involved in. And then the second arrow on the screen is pointing to, and I know that's kind of small, I apologize, but when we send these to you, I would encourage you to dig in here. That second arrow is giving $40 to a homeless person. And then third from the bottom, just under helping someone move, is giving $40 to your church. All right. So in essence, what's happening here is that giving $40 to your church should be akin to giving $40 to needy, to people who would benefit from that. But we haven't messaged that. And so people don't connect those necessarily. They think that giving $40 directly to the needy is better, is a more generous thing to do than giving to the church. Because again, churches aren't going out of their way. They're not doing a good enough job of casting that vision of saying, hey, when you give, here's all the great things that we can do with it. And that's true across the board for the churches that I've worked with, is they all do amazing things with those donations, with those tithes. But that next step is communicating what those tithes are for. All right. And then I do want to stress this. I mentioned a moment ago, making the giving process simple. And we have a lot of tools that can do that. The number one thing that you can do is make sure that your giving page is clean, looks great, it's simple, and perhaps most importantly, it retains the branding of your church at large. So there's not a jarring effect of going to the website and then going to the giving pages. It's one continuous, seamless process. And it looks great, and it also gives the giver confidence that when they get to that giving page, they are giving to the correct entity, to the church that they intend to give to.
Yeah, so let's talk about just a few more tips that we have of how to share your story and engage with mission, so that, as Andrew was talking about, people will be encouraged and they'll see why they should give to your church's mission. So first of all, consider what's your church's unique story. There are things that you do better than any other church in your community. There are things that you do better than any other nonprofit, if you think about that. It kind of put it in that context in your community. So know that story and be able to tell someone if they ask you how your church is unique. To go along with that, a question: do you have a case for support? Case for support is kind of a word that nonprofits talk about a lot, but it simply means, why should people be giving to your church? What causes are you supporting, and what's the greater vision for your church? So in other words, it is a valid question for someone to ask, well, why should I be giving to my church? Where is that money going? What ministries is it supporting, and what impact is it having in our local community and in the world? And then C, review your vision and mission, and ask the question: is your vision fully ingrained in each area of the ministry at your church? In other words, if a family at your church looks at your ministries, do they understand how it ties into the larger vision and mission? Those are all great opportunities to tie these things together and to communicate those clearly. Here's another reason why that's so important. If you go to that next slide, research has been done on people's preferences. And if you notice, the top two things of giver engagement preferences is, first of all, the number one thing, transparency and proper use of donations. So people want to know where their donations are going and what it's supporting. In other words, how's it distributed in the church and out in local ministries and missions and community. But the second thing, highest thing, was communicate about current work and success stories. So they want to know what the results are. They want to know how many people are being reached with mission dollars, for example. They want to know how many people are we making a difference inside our church and outside of our church and our local community. So that you can see that the givers place a high importance on both of these things. And the thing that I'll say is, as people get younger, the more important those things are, the younger the people are in your church. But it's becoming more important to people of all ages. Let's go to that next slide. So a few ideas here. Vision should be evergreen. It should be something that's ongoing in your church. And when you think of vision, that should be like 5, 10, 15 years. That's part of what evergreen means here. And it's long term. But then also we recommend regularly sharing the past direction, where we've come from, current successes, like what's the ministry impact and the wins and the stories that we're having now, and then also future opportunities for people to join and be part of it. And that includes their giving. And then last but not least, engage your givers and encourage them with the overall mission of the church, and be transparent with what their giving supports. Those are all keys for people seeing why they should not only volunteer their time, but also give their money to support the mission and vision of the church.
All right. So next, effectively tracking givers and moving them through tiers. So this starts first and foremost with goals, and we have kind of this methodology. We didn't come up with it here at Touchpoint, but it is something that has been, I think, in circulation since around the '60s, and it's this concept of SMART goals. So what SMART goals is goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So all of your goals should have one of those components, something again that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And that time component at the end is one of the most important because you have to have those markers. So let's talk about a few of these things in terms of measuring goals. A few of these things that Touchpoint software can assist with. So starting with widgets, which is kind of a reporting structure, and then status flags. So first is widgets, and I don't know, I thought I saw his name, but one of our church partners, a gentleman named Heath Counts, did a great job. This is one of his dashboards. We do have flexible dynamic dashboards within Touchpoint, and we can assist your church in getting these put together as well if you'd like to look into that. But Heath and his church, they put together one that provides them just insight and metrics into the goals that they're chasing. So things like recurring giving forecast, how much of that, how much of the recurring giving, or how much of the total giving is coming from recurring giving. And then giving sources. Where are gifts coming from? Are they coming from mobile? Are they one-time gifts, recurring gifts, or some other form of gifts? That way we can help in messaging. So this is a great reporting tool. This is a great way to keep track of where we are. And then again, to take a snapshot of where we are on, say, January 1st, and then revisit that at the end of the first quarter to say, how did we do in achieving these goals? Next, I'll talk about one of my favorite reporting tools within Touchpoint, which is this concept of status flags. And for any of our church partners that are on the call today that aren't utilizing status flags, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at these. Status flags are great because we take the giving components and then we can also wrap them into other components that to give us a more holistic view of who someone is. Brent did a great job earlier of talking about, if someone has stopped giving, that points to maybe something else going on in their life. Maybe there's a marital issue or some other thing going on in that person's life. We can also see those trends in attendance as well. So perhaps someone has both stopped attending and stopped giving. Well, we're going to message to them. We're going to reach out to them in a different way than maybe someone whose giving has increased. And status flags are a great way to do that because we can tie these to dynamic searches that say, okay, here's a list of everyone who has given 2 of the last 4 weeks. They've attended 3 of the last 5 weeks, and they are in the young adult life group. Right. And then those status flags appear on the individual's records. I can easily generate lists of who those individuals are. And then perhaps most importantly, if someone either receives the status flag or loses the status flag, we can configure triggers that specify what needs to happen. So maybe this person, you can see here that they are connected. They have the connected status flag, whatever that might mean for this church. If this person loses the connected flag, well, then our pastors, our ministry leaders, they need to be notified that Mr. Gary Baker here, he has stopped attending or for whatever reason has lost that connected status flag so that we can take appropriate action. Okay. Elevating givers, moving them through the giving process from those who are giving under 1K and then to a place where they're giving everything that God has called them to give. So we like to at Touchpoint talk about adopting a mobile first strategy. Start with the people who are bought in and create a capital campaign or a pledge campaign. So by now, I probably don't have to spend a ton of time on this. I do want to mention it just in case I still need to make the case for mobile. I think most people have bought into this. Most people get it, but I'm just going to take just 1 second to make the case one more time for why mobile is so important to your church. The following metrics have been compiled, and that is the average person spends 4 hours on their smartphones. So they're already there. And if you have a mobile presence, you can stay in front of that person as well. Google reports that 63% of traffic in the United States is coming from mobile devices. And that was in 2019. And I'd be willing to bet that that has changed even in the recent months. And then finally, 61% of people have a better opinion of brands. And I know we don't want to think of your church as a brand necessarily, but they have a better perception of brands if they have a good mobile experience. And so I think that easily translates into how people can view your church. And then take this one step further here. When it comes to, you might say, okay, well, that's all well and good. People are spending time on their mobile device, but are they giving on their mobile device? The answer to that as well is yes. 40% of online transactions happen from a mobile device. That translates to about $930 billion of people spending money using a mobile device. It's predicted by the end of this year, 54% of all e-commerce will happen on a mobile device. So do we need to provide an outlet for giving through a mobile device? The answer is a resounding yes. All right. And then next, start with those who are bought in. A personal anecdote here, I teach a newlywed class at my church, and I was in a season of frustration at one point where I was reaching out to these people who were attending maybe once every other month, and I couldn't get them plugged in. I was trying so hard to really reach out to them, and I expressed this frustration to my ministry leader, and I told him what was going on, and he said, Andrew, you are spending so much time on those people who are not bought in at the expense of those who are. And of course we want to go after the one lost sheep. Of course we need to spend time trying to get them, but don't neglect the people who are right there that are coming every single week. What have you done to reach out to people who are there consistently? And so it is worth our time to spend time reaching the people who are already bought in. Staff is a no-brainer there, but then lay leaders, expressing to our lay leaders, hey, here's what your dollars are for. Here's the vision that will cast for the dollars that are given to the mission of our church. And then finally, those that are already members. And then finally, a pledge campaign. And not all of our churches do this. I'd say it's probably in the neighborhood of maybe 50% of our churches do some manner of pledge campaign. But this is a great way to generate tithe, to generate donations. We even had one church that commissioned us to build a recurring pledging module. So not only can people give on a recurring basis, but they can also pledge on a recurring basis. So if they pledge to give X amount of dollars on a quarterly basis, they can set that up to run from now until forever. And that's a great thing for the church because it does a few things for you. One, it gets a commitment. And two, it allows you to see some manner of predictability in your tithes and donations. So that's a great way to encourage donations. All right. So now effective segmentation. So there's kind of this concept, especially in the secular world, of segmentation. How do we reach people? And I've really been encouraging churches to adopt this same model. To identify different segments within your church. And when it comes to informing your congregation about opportunities to give, we need to be approaching these people differently. We need to be approaching the different segments of the congregation differently. These are just a few examples of how you might segment. So we could start with something like giving behavior. Obviously, we're not going to approach someone who is a first-time giver or even a second-time giver the same way that we would approach someone who has been giving to our church for 30 years and is one of our top givers. We're going to approach them in a different way. So taking the time to identify who those people are. And then again, adding in kind of the attendance element, looking at life stage, looking at what is the person involved in, what are they already doing, what organs or involvements are they already participating in. Again, we're probably going to reach out to people in the young adult department a different way than we would in, say, the young marrieds department, okay? Because those are two very different life stages. So we can have different messages for each of them. Taking a look at giving behavior is obviously, like I said a moment ago, it's an important element here. But then also moving people towards online giving. And I've actually talked to some churches that kind of feel a little bit differently on this. And I completely appreciate that. I've had a few churches tell me, hey, we really don't encourage online recurring giving that much because we want it to be an intentional act. And if that's you, I completely understand. However, I do want to make a case that online recurring giving is a great marker for healthy giving at your church. And I think back to honestly February 2020, when those churches that weren't really encouraging online giving or sort of neglecting it, um, they hadn't been encouraging online recurring giving, and then one day people weren't putting tithes into an offering plate because they couldn't physically come to church, and all those tithes were missed out on, and not everyone's going to go back and kind of backfill that, and so those churches missed out on giving. So having that online recurring giving again gives us great predictability in our donations, and really it is a great marker for health within our church. All right, Brent.
All right. So Andrew shared some great tips and best practices on segmenting giving. We at MortarStone, we also have the report. The band composition is how you can take that even further. And part of what I mean by that is recurring givers is really awesome, and that's churches should strive for that. But don't stop there. You can also continue to grow those givers beyond being recurring givers into what we would call top givers, or those higher ends of those giving bands. Because if you look at it, probably bands 2, 3, 4 are going to be your more consistent givers and your recurring givers. But when they to get to bands 4, the higher ends of bands 4 and 5, they're going to be giving above and beyond a recurring gift. And so this is another way that we can segment those givers and target people specifically for ways that we can educate them and help them. Let me give you an example if we go to the next slide. We can not only look at their giving, but we can look at their age demographics. And so you can dial in like band 4, band 5 givers, for example, that are in a targeted age range where we could do some things like training them, providing education and opportunities for them to be able to learn how they can give not only from their income, but also from their assets. And just as an aside, only about 1% of most people's wealth is in cash or liquid investments, things that they would normally give from their income. The rest of their wealth is in assets. They're non-cash things, they're non-liquid assets. And so educating our givers, especially age appropriate givers, on how to do that can be a critical way, a great opportunity for your church to continue to grow your giving. So let's go to that next slide. Here's some research that we have seen. We're in the beginning of the biggest transfer of wealth, over $41 trillion, that's going to transfer generationally over the next 25 to 30 years, depending on the research that you look at. So that's a big opportunity for people to learn how they can include the church in that process. Let's go to the next slide. If you look at who's actually has the wealth right now, the intergenerational wealth, most of that is within the baby boomers right now, but it's going to transfer to Gen X and millennials. So we not only want to educate those people who are age appropriate, the baby boomers now, we also want to educate the younger generations on stewardship. So the church can benefit when that money is passed, and even with current gifts today that are non-cash, but also in the future with the stewards who are going to be inheriting that wealth. That's really important. Let's go to that next slide too. The other thing that we like to point out is that most giving in nonprofits is going up overall. You can see giving to education, even adjusted for inflation, is going up over 10%. Giving to human services and other types of nonprofits is going up over 3%. After adjusted for inflation, 5% before being adjusted. Look at that bottom point though. Giving to religious institutions, including churches, has only increased by 0.5% from 2019. So in other words, it's flat. It kind of reflects church giving, doesn't it? I mean, if you think about what we showed at the beginning, most churches giving over the past year has been flat, but it's even been flat if you go back a little bit further. And so the key thing to point out here is that overall giving has been increasing, but it's not been increasing as much to churches and religious institutions. Part of the reason for that is because nonprofits know the importance of educating their givers on creative ways to give. And that includes giving from assets, non-cash giving, etc. So they have teams and people who are educating their givers on all the different ways that they can give. And most churches don't know that their givers can give to their church the same way. Most of their givers don't realize that they can give to their church that way as well. And so that's something that we can help your church with and help your givers. Let's go to that next slide. Let's talk about some ways you can build relationships with those financial leaders, those band five givers, top givers. First of all, build personal relationships with them, just like you would with your core givers. But this group is especially important for your senior leaders to build personal relationships with them. You know, those financial leaders have unique opportunities. They also have unique challenges in their life. They need a pastor just as much as a new member or a new giver does, but it's in different ways. The second thing, invite those financial leaders to participate in vision planning, the mission vision of the church, but also what we call legacy lanes. So Andrew mentioned earlier, you can invite people to get involved in missions. You can invite them to get involved in a building campaign or a specific community outreach at your church or a particular area within the church. Each of those areas are legacy lanes. So you can invite these financial leaders to get involved with the planning and the involvement with each of those areas. And when they identify the area that they're most passionate about and get involved with those, guess what? They're also going to want to support those things financially even more. And so if you pair that with giving them creative ways that they can give, not just from their income, but from their assets, that can grow their giving exponentially. That third thing on the list, host classes and events specifically for financial leaders and age appropriate givers that teach gift planning, legacy giving, and financial stewardship, and then teach those financial leaders how they can give long-term sustainable gifts, not just non-cash gifts today, but also as part of their legacy, part of their estate plan as well.
All right, and we're gonna close today talking just real briefly, and I do want to leave some time at the end for questions. We have a few questions that are already coming in, but I do want to talk about good communication. What we talk about here at Touchpoint all the time is sending the right message to the right people at the right time. Email is a great way to do that. Now, I will admit that email more and more these days is becoming white noise. So we'll talk about some other things here in just a second. But I do want to stress to you, like I said a moment ago, on mobile. I know I keep harping on that, but making sure that you're using good practices for mobile devices so that your emails are readable. Touchpoint does have a great mobile email builder, so make sure you're building your templates in there so that they look great both on desktop and on mobile. Next, deep linking. We talk about being mobile first a lot, and using deep links is a great way to drive people to your mobile device. What a deep link is, for those of you that aren't already aware, is a deep link is a link that is smart enough to know if someone is on a desktop, it takes them to the desktop version of, say, a giving page. If they're on a mobile device, it's going to take them to the mobile app version of the giving page. If they don't have your mobile app, it'll take them to the Play Store, either for iOS or for Android, and encourage them to download that that app so that they can then continue with the giving process. And then finally, push notifications is a great way to stay in front of people. These are lightweight, and if people have push notifications turned on their app, they will see this. And it's just a really quick and easy way for the people to get messages to people. Again, if someone were to tap on this, you can actually dictate in Touchpoint what page this goes to within the app. So really, really nice way of communicating with people. And then finally, giving statements. Brent mentioned this towards the top, but just providing statements to people on at minimum a quarterly basis, so they can keep up with what they've given year to date. And then finally at the end of the year for, of course, tax purposes. All right, and so we'll close with this. Again, going back to our concept of SMART goals, you can't manage what you can't measure. So it's important to make sure that we have we're tracking and that we're measuring those gifts. And then Brent, I'm going to hand it to you to talk about the special offer here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're excited to partner with Touchpoint, and Touchpoint churches can actually get a version of MortarStone. We call it like MortarStone Basic or MortarStone Lite, where you can see where you're healthy or unhealthy. You can see all the reports that I've shared with you today, and many more, to see what your retention looks like of new givers, core givers, top givers, et cetera. Where is our giving coming from? Those giving bands, where are we healthy or unhealthy? Where are opportunities for growth? So you can visit a page that we've created, mortarstone.com/touchpoint/2. And by the way, I think the Touchpoint team is going to send an email out to you as well with a link to that,
Yes.
to make it easy for you to be able to do that. But you could also, if you want to go to that URL today, you can do that. And basically, it makes it really easy for you to sign up for MortarStone for free, connect your data from Touchpoint. Really simple. We've got an API integration built where it makes it really easy and quick to do that. And you can start looking at the data, and then our support team will be happy to train you on it and show you kind of where you're healthy or unhealthy and where those best opportunities for growth are. So we're excited about that, and we'd love for you to take advantage of it to help your church.
Absolutely. And yeah, Brent's 100% correct. We are going to send this out, so you will have an opportunity to go there. But in the meantime, if you want to jump straight there, mortarstone.com/touchpoint-2. So a little bit of Q&A. So we have received a few questions. Brent, I hope I don't put you on the spot here, but we got what I think is a really interesting question.
Okay.
Based on the flat giving to churches, is it better strategy to select specific projects and sell those over general giving? So for example, encouraging people to give to building projects rather than to a general project.
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, if you have a big project, you can do a capital campaign, or you can do a vision campaign, some people call that. But also there may be other projects that aren't like 3 to 5 year projects, for example, that might be shorter term, but you can still have specific funds and specific efforts for those. I'll give you an example. My local church, I'm an elder at my local church. And so we have an end of year giving special offering that we take. And every year leading up to that time, we tell people, hey, here's the specific projects that we're going to support. And sometimes if one of those is fairly large, we'll set up a separate fund, if you will, to communicate that, and where people can give specifically to that. Of course, we do missions budget, and we do a mission Sunday as well, and we have that as a separate fund. But absolutely, depending on the size of that project, if you will, you can specifically communicate and allow people to give to those projects. You don't want to do it too often, because then people might just give to that and not the giving fund, the overall fund or the general fund. But you can do that for some specific things. And the other thing I would recommend too, you can tie in those legacy lanes that I talked about earlier. You can invite some of those financial leaders to get involved with some of those specific areas. So that's a couple ways that you can get people involved to help support specific efforts. I hope that answered your question. If you have another follow-up question to that, you can put that in the Q&A as well.
All right, good question. Thank you for that. Okay, another question from Wendy. A lot, if not most, of our members are afraid to give online. How do we get around this thought process? Any suggestions? So I have a couple thoughts. Brent, I'd be curious if you had any as well.
Go ahead. Andrew, why don't you start, and then I might add, because you guys are experts on the online.
Yeah. So a few things that I mentioned at the top. It needs to be dirt simple. It needs to be very simple. There are features in Touchpoint that can assist with this. One that I would recommend is we have an integration with Twilio, which is an SMS platform, in other words, texting platform, and actually texting the link to the individual. And we have a special link in Touchpoint that we call a register link, but in this case, it would be for online giving. And what's special about this link is that when someone taps on it from their phone, it takes them to the link, and they're already logged in. In other words, the system already knows who they are, so it's already going to have their name and information. All they need to do is indicate how much they'd like to give, which fund they'd like to give to, and if it's recurring giving, then obviously the frequency, and then obviously fill in their giving information, and they're done. And so just having the one tap, go to one page and get it done, that's gonna help. I would also say, you know, promoting it even from the pulpit, which not a lot of churches do, either before or after. Obviously not in the middle of a sermon, unless of course you wanted to, but at the front end or back end of a sermon, just to say, hey everybody, we have this service available to you. We're going to show you up on the screen right now how easy this is, and then kind of walk them through that presentation. So those are a couple ways to hopefully make that as easy as possible. Obviously, if we're driving people to the website using a deep link, Touchpoint's new giving pages, last thing I'll mention on this, Touchpoint's giving pages now allow the individual to log in using a phone number. So rather than having to remember a username and password, because honestly, who remembers a username and password for their church? We can just use the phone number. And as long as the phone number that they use is connected to their record in the database, we know who they are. We're going to send them a 5-digit or 6-digit code. They put that in, and then that's going to really expedite the process and make it much easier for them.
Yeah, a couple other thoughts that I have. I'm going to use my church example. We send instructions out from our elders, one of our elders, a couple times a year. Typically, it's before the summer begins and then toward the end of the year, just to make sure people know. And we'll kind of context it as, hey, we have a lot of new members that have joined our church. We just want to make sure you know how you can give online, the instructions. And we reiterate in that email, and this is coming from leadership, your giving is secure. Like that information is not going to be shared. It's private. Like Andrew said, they get to log in, set up their account. So just reassuring people that that it is safe. That I'll even say when I'm sending it out, I give online. It works great. So just giving them that reassurance and trust, if you will, that it is going to be safe for them.
All right, so we have a few questions that are in here that are specific to Touchpoint functionality, and so I will. I'm going to address those actually after the fact. Here we have time for one more question, real quickly, and Brent, I think this one is for you. Do you feel younger donors want to follow their quote unquote follow their money rather than simply give to a general fund? What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. They do, for sure. They want to follow their money and they want to see the impact of it. But I will say this, if you regularly communicate where the money is going and the results and the stories, we actually see that they're willing to give to the general fund. So it's less about creating different funds for them to be able to give to, and more about communicating the mission and the vision and the stories of impact. That's really what they want to know. Now, I will say this, the younger generation, sometimes it's harder to get them to give to brick and mortar or a capital campaign to build a building than it is a missions opportunity. So that's true. But in general, the more you communicate the mission of the church, and again, the mission's not to build a building. The mission's what happens from that building, how it impacts families in the community, the world, et cetera. If you do that regularly and connect that vision, mission, we find that they're willing to give to the general fund.
Okay, well, that's it. It is 3:00 on the button. We did it. Thank you everybody so much for attending. We really, really appreciate it. I hope that this has been helpful to you. Again, I would really encourage you to take a look if you are one of our Touchpoint church partners, MortarStone.com/touchpoint-2, and we're going to get this information in your hands as quickly as possible. So thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.